how to effectively attract and retain customers in the digital era. I'm very confident we can cover everything that needs to be discussed on this topic in 45 minutes. But no, I'm really excited, to be honest, to hear the perspective of Jacob and Divakar today, as I'm sure that you are. And I guess you already heard my introduction. I think the only thing that I would say is, yeah, my background is marketing. So with the work that we do at at Rival, we do a lot with challenger brands in the fintech space and helping them understand how to scale. And a big part of that is, of course, effectively attracting and retaining customers. There's more to marketing, but that really is at the crux of kind of what the marketing engine needs to do within businesses. And yeah, as you heard me stumble right there, I got into this world of fintech when I was at a company called 11FS, which maybe some of you have heard of. We did a lot of content around kind of the changing landscape of both product and marketing in the fintech world. So I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves. Divakar, would you mind going first?
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So I'm Divakar Papanathan. I work for a company called Alpha Financial Markets Consulting. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, we are a consultancy that focuses exclusively on the investment management industry. We've got about 1,000 people globally, and we work with around 80 of the top 100. In terms of my role specifically within there, albeit we as a firm consult to all parts of the investment management operating model, as it were, everything other than an investment decision or the advice itself. In terms of my role, I work with our wealth management clients, and I'm responsible for overseeing all the work that we do around digital transformation. So hopefully some useful experience, insights, and ideas to share as part of the discussion.
Great. Jacob?
Yes, can you hear me? My name is Jacob. I come from Danske Bank. We are the largest bank in Denmark, second largest in Scandinavia, and I think also the second largest asset manager. My day job is global head of foreign exchange and transaction banking sales for our 250,000 business banking customers. And then you might ask, so why is doing a WealthTech Summit? But before that, I used to run our customer engagement within the wealth management space. So that was our pension company, private banking, asset management, and retail investments. And basically trying to build a consistent and commercially driven experience across physical and digital interfaces within the retail and asset management space and private banking space. And before that, I was 15 years with Saxo Bank, also driving the Middle East business and also here in the UK.
Amazing. All right, so I'm sure that we could fill a book with what these two gentlemen know about how to effectively attract and retain customers. We have some questions that we've put together for you, but to be honest, I know that, as mentioned, you can submit questions through the Brella app. I'd rather do those as we go as opposed to only at the end. So please do, if you have questions, if you want us to dig deeper on something, would love to make this as conversational as possible. Drop them into the app. They're going to show up here on the iPad, and I'll try to weave them in as we go. So we're going to start with a purposefully broad question, because I'm curious to kind of see the direction that you guys take it. This topic of effectively attracting and retaining customers in the digital era, where are we right now? Like, what is the state of the union? What are the things that are most top of mind for you and that you think this audience should know? Divakar, I'll start with you.
Thank you. So I think when I think about this topic, I think it falls into, if I'm being super crude, two buckets. So how can we generate insights to preemptively serve our clients with information that feels relevant to them? And how can we automate as much as possible to enable us to be as efficient as possible? And every conversation that I have with clients and everything that all my clients are doing are trying to achieve one or two of these things. But in terms of your question of where are we today, albeit those are the priorities, those are the things which my clients are focused on, I think the reality of where we are today is probably a lot further back than that. And where we are today is about putting in place the building blocks. So working out, as a firm, what do we want to be known for? What do we want to differentiate on? What's our USP? From that, moving forward into, okay, what capabilities do we need to have in place to get there? And today, most of the challenges which I speak to my clients about are, what are the technologies that we need? How can we be as flexible as possible? And how can we make sure that we've got as good a data as possible? and all of the other more exciting stuff will come afterwards to some degree. But that's probably my reality of the conversations that I spend most of my time having today.
Yeah, I was saying this as we were chatting before we came up on stage. You know, when it comes to marketing, and I really think this applies to anything, but in terms of the world that I know, so many topics, so many trends, so many things that are thrown around, but really a lot of it comes down to a few basic fundamentals done really well. And that's kind of a bit of what I hear from you. And the other thing that I would add, and then Jacob, want to get your take on the State of the Union, is when it comes to, you know, we do a lot of work with like brand strategy, product positioning, and things like that. And especially in the fintech world, and especially within the B2B side of the fintech world, and I know there's a lot of B2B businesses here as well, a lot of, you know, the how do we differentiate is such a key question to answer, because I think that a lot of businesses think about what they do well, and it tends to be very product and kind of engineer and technical led, like here's why it's amazing, which is of course important. But really from a consumer standpoint, from a jobs to be done standpoint of why someone would hire your product or your service, it needs to be about what's different about you. Why should I choose you over someone else? So I just wanted to build on that because I think it's a great point. Jacob, where are we right now in your mind?
So I actually think we're probably one of the most interesting times when it comes to digital customer engagement. So there are two things that I find important when you're looking at digital engagement. It's friction and its relevance. Those are sort of the two guiding points, right? If you are successful in building digital engagement. So remove friction, make it easy for customers, and then ensure that it's relevant. Here we're working with some new enablers that really makes it a lot different, right? We've been very data-driven before, but it's been more like model. We're starting now with embracing AI. AI is democratizing. It's democratizing on the wealth management space. We can also see how it's democratizing on the transaction banking FX space, where you see customers becoming more and more requiring sophisticated products, or being able to take advantage of sophisticated advice and products to a larger degree than they used to do before. And then open banking, it's a huge theme for us as well. We spent a decade competing with other banks and ERP providers and so on about winning the customer interface. We've sort of realized that us as a bank, we sort of lost that battle. Now it's about being where the customer is. But the big challenge here, and that's where I think AI becomes very interesting, is that we are not in a position where we would like to be a product pusher only, right? That's not the way we want to diminish ourselves. So what AI does, what API does for us, is that we actually allow us to sort of distribute not just product, but also advice. And that's where we become relevant, and that's where we can sort of build a position and a relevance to customers outside our own sort of ecosystem as such.
Took us 6 minutes to talk about AI. I'm surprised it took that long. So I want to come back to that because we are going to talk about kind of trends and topics, and of course AI and machine learning and large language modeling and all that is going to factor in. But I do want to double click on this for a second, because we talked in our prep call about the role of trust and the importance of trust in this topic. And Jago, I'm going to stick with you on this one to start. When it comes to that idea of reducing friction and driving engagement, how do you think about the role of trust? And I'd love to get kind of pretty practical with that. Like, are there things that you, like, obviously we can all agree that building trust with the consumer is important. What are the ways that you practically or you know, your business practically goes about, or that you've seen other businesses do successfully, go about building trust with consumers?
I think one of the things that we have really going for us in Danske Bank is our 150 years history, and the fact that we have some of the brightest minds working in Scandinavia in our little institution. We need to be able to sort of bring their knowledge and their advice to more people. So that is the whole thing that when we're looking at it is about how do we build scale into this. So we're working a lot with content-driven marketing. We're looking a lot with content-driven advice. We're looking a lot about distributing things that are individual to customers, yet built on what we know best, which is advice, really. So having something that's not necessarily generic, but that's built on individual data, and that's basically also adds value to them in that sense.
Yeah, just as an anecdote from my side, so in almost any engagement that we do with a fintech around the brand strategy and product positioning side, at some point you come to the conversation of really you need to be able to communicate and deliver on trust on one side, but then innovation on the other. And I think it's interesting because a lot of the startups in this space, the challengers in this space, obviously what they lean into and kind of the credibility that they have is more on the innovation side. But if you're an established business that's been around for 150 years, you have more of the credibility side, and maybe you need to shore up more of the innovation side. So I just want to throw that out there because we see it every single time, and in some other categories as well, but certainly anytime we're talking about money and how you need to communicate to somebody about money as a brand. Tavakar, what about from your perspective around the topic of trust?
So I think one of the elements goes back to where we started this conversation, which is on relevance. So I think one of the key aspects is, as a client, I want my advisor to know me. I therefore want to make sure that all of the communication, all the content that I'm getting is relevant to me. And there's certainly a role for digital to play in that regard. I think it also comes down to I want to be able to know that you really understand me, and one of the places where our clients are starting today is just the practical aspects of onboarding a client. Right, I want to tell you something once and only once, but it's very rare actually amongst my clients that they ask the question once and only once because of the process that they have today. That for instance, at the very outset is trust, right? I'm telling you something, I want you to understand, I want you to listen to it, and I only want you to ask me that thing once. That's one element of trust, and the role that technology can play in the role, and I guess how some of the firms that I work with are prioritising that today. But I think it also comes down to, I guess perhaps more broadly than technology specifically, I think you start looking at different types of clients, different demographics, and trust can mean different things to different people. So earlier this week, some of my fabulous female colleagues published a piece of research which they did into female investors who are increasingly holders of wealth, decision makers when it comes to financial advice, more so than perhaps has been the case historically. And you look at that demographic and an affinity to the advisor, women are much more likely, based on the research that my colleagues have done, to trust an advisor that is also female, for instance. I wouldn't have necessarily have expected that, but that's what the research which they've completed has identified. Equally, that demographic from the research are much more likely to build trust based on recommendations and referrals, more so on average than the male clients. So I think that there's some certain fundamentals of what builds trust with everybody, but then understanding who your clients are, who your target clients are, doing the research into those areas to understand what are the nuances around that, and gender is just one of them, but there are so many other factors as well.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
I think if I can add to it when you speak about trust. So when we built our robo-advisor June, which was I think the first robo-advisor from incumbent bank in Europe, we also realized how much trust there is in good UX, how much trust there is in tonality. So June was built with the vision to attract first-time investors and the mass affluent market that normally just put their savings in savings accounts. And we sort of looked into see what sort of barriers do these people have when it comes to investing. And we basically have built these fairly well-diverse index funds for them to build in. And having something as seamless UX there, a very experience, where in a tonality, in a wording that resonated with them and they understood, instead of using complex language, instead of using complex charting and so on, was really the main means of building trust, right? That's how they trusted the system as such. If they come across something that looks fancy, looks very sophisticated, but they don't understand it, the trust is gone. So that was all about that there's a lot of trust in the simplicity of building digital solution in that sense.
Yeah, I think it's such a good point because again, we within the industry, on these panels, at these conferences, we kind of talk about things from a business standpoint. We talk about the product, we talk about, the solution, we talk about the marketing, but from a consumer standpoint, there is no distinction. There's just the experience and the value that it delivers. And of course, for consumers, AKA human beings, of which we are all that, as well as practitioners of this industry, there's no distinction between a fintech experience and any other category. Like the expectations for what good looks like are set in the world around us, not just compared to other potential fintech solutions or competitors. So we have our first question from the audience, so thank you for sending that in, and please keep them coming as we go. The question is, what are some of the biggest challenges around retaining customers in the digital era? So you're welcome to answer that. I'm going to spin it slightly because I think it could be a bridge into something pretty interesting. And I'm going to say, or, what are the biggest mistakes that you see people making when it comes to effectively, or I guess in this case it would be, not being able to attract and retain customers? What are the mistakes that you see that people can avoid?
I think we are trying every day to be as humble as possible in terms of our own offering and in terms of our own sort of capability. I think that's sort of the number one thing, because you never know what's going to come and hit you down the road. So we have a lot of talks with fintechs. We have a lot of talks with especially the startups, and we're also seeing how we can open up our own ecosystems through partnerships. So we used to do a lot of seed investing into fintechs and so on. We don't do that as much anymore, but we're sort of more embracing a partnership model in that sense. So ensuring that we sort of open up to provide customers with the best possible options, even though it's not our own, I think is a good first step. And then I think the whole idea of you believing that you can own the customer interface, at least in Scandinavia, is dead. Open banking APIs is already changing that significantly. And the banks that hasn't embraced that will have huge challenges in the future.
I think on that point of what are the biggest challenges, I think for sure our industry faces challenges. Because, to your point earlier, for many individuals dealing with wealth managers, the expectations that they have of digital are set by the experience that they have in other industries. But there are complications, there are regulatory burdens, there are all of these things that make achieving the same outcome in our industry, legacy technology. I mean, there are so many things that are specific to this industry that make achieving those same outcomes harder. And so, in that sense, I think that probably is the threat, and that's the challenge of the digital era, right? Which is it is just harder sometimes to achieve those same levels of experience. I think one of the other challenges that's probably going away to some degree now is scale. Particularly in the UK, the wealth management industry has historically been incredibly fragmented, and that has an impact in terms of the level of investment that you can make into some of these technologies. Again, that's not something which is reflected in other industries where firms who are the dominant players in those spaces do have more opportunity to make investment in some of these technologies. So I guess that's one side of it. But I guess the flip side of it is that too is changing now. And we certainly see it in terms of the technologies that many of our clients are using. They're much more, modular in nature, they're much more configurable. The degree to which our clients are beholden to vendor products and vendor roadmaps, the ability for clients to customize their technologies and set them up in ways that are more reflective of their business, their clients, their value proposition, that's changing really quickly now as the technology is evolving. So I guess that's, I think, probably one of the challenges that has been the case historically. But I do think with the consolidation that we're seeing, and also changes in the technology that's available out there, and the prioritization that many vendors are putting on ensuring that the technologies that they offer are flexible, are customizable, are easily integrate with, I hope that some of those challenges might somewhat abate over the next few years.
I think also just going back to what we touched upon before, I mean, relevance. I mean, in terms of retaining customers, you need to have continuous relevance. I think the days of newsletters are done, right? We stopped sending newsletters in bulk to customers, and making sure that every time we engage with our customers digitally, it is relevant to them. And I think we learned it the hard way. in our mobile bank, for instance, we had this channel where you could communicate with customers, and we had a bit of a party there, just spamming customers with everything that we thought was relevant, all the kind of product. And the only thing that ended up there was that the channel itself died, right? So we lost one of the most precious things we had, which was a channel to communicate with our customers, simply because we didn't respect the customers and thought that everything we had was to their liking. So when it comes to, like, again, I'm sitting in the capital market side right now, and when we engage digitally, and let's say there's an event in the market in euro or with pounds in that sense, we are out there and reaching our customers within 20 minutes, but we only reach the customers that actually has a registered exposure to that currency, or we know from digitally has an interest in that currency. Nobody else. And if they don't open it, if they don't attend to it, if they don't, we remove them. I think we really, really cherish our channels. And I think that's the number one, the key thing, the message that I have when it comes to these two on the engagement side.
Cherish the channels, but really cherish the customer is kind of what you're saying. Because
exactly.
I think it's entirely about to zoom all the way out, take the biggest step back. Good marketing from my perspective and what we do, good product. It's all about how can you add differentiated value to the customer, and consistently, particularly in today's world, you need to your point, kind of have that constant stream of innovation of delivering more and different value. I'm going to pick up on the newsletter thing because it's a bit of a hill that I'm willing to die on right now. I don't think the channel's dead. I think that putting bad content through that channel is dead. It's about
my
the
point
value.
was just, is the generic aspect to it, right?
I totally agree, but I wanted to put it out there because I think it could be an interesting thing to think about for people. I'm fascinated by the opportunity of email as a channel right now, because I think everybody has reduced it to the lowest common denominator of just like pushing, I don't know if I can swear on this panel, stuff through it, but actually everybody has email. Everybody sees it for the most part. You know, you got to get the distribution mechanism right. But I think about, and this is actually what I was going to say to this conversation, I don't know if any of you know Simon Taylor, who's a co-founder at 11FS, who I worked with. He started and writes an amazing email newsletter called FinTech Brain Food. He spends 8 hours a week writing it. So I think the bar for delivering value through email has been raised, but if you can deliver differentiated value, people will pay attention. And what I was going to say about Simon, because I saw him yesterday and he was saying this, and I think it's really interesting. He was saying he's, I don't know if it was a book or an article, but the founder of Superhuman, do you remember that email app? I don't even know if it's still around, but it was like a wildly successful email app. And what he said in terms of challenges around retaining customers, or really how you retain customers, is he said, focus on what your most engaged users are doing, and that's your product roadmap. And so that, you know, I'm not a product guy, but I think that that's super interesting in terms of the challenges of retaining customers, is essentially focusing on the wrong things or not knowing the right things to focus on.
No, listen, I totally agree. I think actually as long as you have relevant content, it's not, length is not an issue. I mean, 5 years ago we talked about you can't send an email more than 20 lines, right? Yeah. Maximum, if not people lose attention. But if it's curated to that specific customer, yes, they would very much appreciate it. I mean, on the private banking side, for instance, we also do a lot of lifestyle content as well, right? But we don't send content on classic cars to somebody who's not into classic cars, right? Because it's just gonna not be appreciated in that sense. And the same thing goes with investment advice, market-related advice. It has to be specific to them, or you lose them. And it is about building a affiliation towards your company, your brand, and your business, and that can only be done if you at all times are relevant. And the competition of the customer's interface and the customer attendance is just so much harder than this today. We also see content providers from outside, even though we don't have the same as the UK with IFAs and so on, with the banks basically own the investment market area. But there is a lot of smaller investment managers and so on who now has a reach that they didn't have before, that we're now competing with. And some of them are very, very bright and intelligent. And that, of course, also keeps us on our toes.
There's a saying in the marketing industry that people don't dislike advertising, they dislike bad content. I think that's true, even if you think about it from your own perspective. I mean, people get really excited about ads for Christmas here. It's still an ad. It's just more interesting content. So I want to move us on because we've gotten through one of our questions in 25 minutes, but I knew this was going to happen with you guys. All right. So we have another question from the audience, which is, what role could generative AI play in this fight to attract and retain customers? But I want to wrap that up with what was going to be our second question. So I'm sure we're going to touch on AI, but the question that we had was, which trends and topics are driving the most change right now? And what I wanted to really get into within that is, we all read the headlines, we all kind of know the buzzwords, but if there's either a specific aspect of those trends that we all know, or something that you're particularly passionate about that you think doesn't get enough airtime in our industry, but when it comes to trends and topics, and one of you is going to have to talk about generative AI, what's driving the most change right now? What should people really be paying attention to? Tavakar?
So I guess I make a distinction between what do you need to be aware of is coming versus what's the thing to be prioritizing now. And on the topics of generative AI, amongst others, I put it into the category of be aware that it's coming, but it's not necessarily the thing to be prioritizing now. And the reason why I say that is, so on Monday this week, I was chatting to a CEO of one of our clients, and in passing, he kind of, as an anecdote to kind of reference where they are in terms of their stage of maturity, he said, I can't even work out how many people work for my company. I speak to my HR team, and sometimes the number is 3,012, sometimes it's 314, sometimes it's 311, and it could all be in 24 hours, and nobody's been hired or fired in that period of time. That's where we're starting from. And you ask HR to look at his system, you realise he is CEO, there are 3 versions of him in their HR database. He says to me, that's where I'm starting from today. Now, I need to know where I ultimately want to get to so that I can work out what to prioritise and when. But in terms of what are the things that are shaping our industry today, what are the things that are being prioritised today, what are the things that perhaps should be prioritised today, in my experience, the things that are driving the most value in the immediate term are creating connectivity between those core systems, ensuring that there's flexibility in there, ensuring that there are processes in place around data. That's my experience of the reality. And that done right unlocks the ability to use AI. And there are firms that I work with who very quickly have even to a point where things like suitability reports, or at least the first draft of them, are being written using AI. You can get there pretty quick, but for most firms that I work with, that's not the place they are today.
On AI, really have to be careful. It's such a buzzword, right? Like, I think there are 2 things that we're looking into right now. So on generative AI, we are working very much what we call augmented AI. So advisor tools, advisor sales material. So we're now testing, for instance, for foreign exchange salespeople. So every time before they have a meeting with a specific customer, we'll have an AI generating the sales material as a test to see, okay, this is specific to the customer, this is the scenarios, foreign exchange risk scenarios and so on, that you could have a dialogue with the customer about. First step. Second step of that, of course, is to make that available to customers. So we're a big bank, we're also a very conservative bank, so it's probably going to take a little while before we've had the governance and so on ready to dip our toes in that. Then we're looking into what we call more sort of descriptive AI. So that could be having, we're launching our own Danske GPT very soon. That could be where we would have test customers asking GPT for descriptive on their portfolio, descriptive about how did their portfolio evolve over the last 6 months and so on. So more sort of a advanced chatbot functionality. Again, super relevant and built on their data. That's sort of the first step where we are. The second part that we're looking into, or the third part we're looking into right now is we're very fortunate in Scandinavia that we have abundance of data, not just for the own data that we sit on, but from public sector that we can access fairly easily through APIs. So seeing how tax data, other publicly available information data available, how that can enrich our models and our engagement with customers is of course something we want to test as well. looking into right now. Obviously, there's quite a big agency risk there on the data side, so it requires quite a lot of testing. But I think I sort of drink the Kool-Aid on this one, to be quite honest with you. A skeptic as always, but I think it is what we're possible to do here from a democratization point of view and from a reach point of view with AI is really amazing. And what we can do already now for advisors to make them more efficient and make the dialogues that they have with customers more relevant with fairly simple models is also makes me quite optimistic on this.
Yeah, I always think about that expression of you overestimate what's going to happen in a year and underestimate in 10 years. I think that's, from my perspective, very much where we are with AI. I think it totally depends on industry and use case and business and all that stuff. But, you know, you mentioned test, you know, you mentioned it's maybe one of those things to be kind of keeping an eye on. That's probably where I would put it. I think the only thing I would say is, like, there's a tendency to wait until it really breaks for particularly big companies to adapt. And I think there needs to be some type of testing and learning, some type of innovation budget or resource that's assigned to starting to figure this stuff out. Because if you wait until the race is really on, then you're going to be way too far behind. I think the only thing that I'm going to add, and I guess it is relative to generative AI, but from a marketing standpoint, what I'm fascinated by and what I think the trends and topics that are going to be driving the most change for this world and many others is fundamentally the traditional advertising world. And having worked in advertising agencies for a long time, if you've seen Mad Men, a lot of it, I swear to God, has not changed that much since then. It's very manual. It's a lot of people coming up with ideas, usually subjectively, writing content, buying and like it's very, very manual. And I think the wave of AI, but also just in general, marketing automation and customer data platforms and the whole tech stack that allows you to automate what used to be manual. I think there's tremendous changes coming on the marketing front with that. And so again, you know, there's a few businesses where that's going to change wholesale overnight, but to the 1 year, 10-year thing, I think 10 years from now, how we think about marketing, whether you're a challenger, whether you're an established business, and certainly if you're in the marketing services world, is going to be fundamentally different.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, we just spoke before. I have a wife who works in advertising, as mentioned, right? And we used to always talk about that advertising was sort of the last frontier, the creative business. All our kids have to work in the creative business now because everything else is going to be taken over by AI. I mean, her industry is really the one that's embracing AI right now. She does production. I mean, all storyboards, all voiceovers, and so on is AI generated already now. And we're spending a lot. Why I'm saying this is that I think it's about also in the financial services, and it'll be really to look at all the use cases. So we're spending a lot of time in really educating our people on how they can use ChatGPT personally, because the more they understand how ChatGPT and generative AI can be used in their own private lives, the more they can resonate and bring that back home and reflect on how it can be used in business and their work life. And I think the ideas and the trust is just really improving on that sense. The more they expose themselves to it.
I'm just going to touch on. There's another question in here that was kind of very specific to the acquisition side around the challenges post iOS 14, increased competition and costs. How do you approach client acquisition? The thing I'd say quickly on that is it's forever changed. Like, we are never going back, and I think we're going to look back on the pre-iOS 14 era as like, that was insanity in terms of what businesses could do, and the $5 CPMs on Facebook and the $10 CPA costs and all that. And so in a more constructive way, I think, you know, what I was saying about data and technology, that is now the competitive advantage. It's not the micro optimizations of paid media done manually in client acquisition. All right, I want to keep us moving. I think I want to go to, actually, no, let's touch on this quickly, because I think it'd be good to kind of try to get very specific with some practical stuff for people. So we have a question in here, and maybe we can just spend a couple minutes on it. How do you measure success? What are the metrics or KPIs that people should be focusing on within this topic of acquisition and retention of customers in the digital era? Tvaker?
So I guess in the broadest terms, you know, the majority of our clients today use NPS. That's the standard kind of really broad metric that's used, and there's studies which we run. We run benchmarking studies for our wealth management clients on that. But then you scratch below the surface of that, and there it starts to become quite nuanced, because it depends on what it is that a client views as their differentiator. It depends on what it is that the client is, what's the problem that you're trying to solve. There are some clients, the problem that they're trying to solve is scalability. There's other clients that we work with, the problem they're trying to solve is demand generation. There's other clients where it's, the great transfer of wealth, and we want to be able to monitor how effectively we are engaging with clients digitally, because that's where we're investing. The answer to that question is so broad, and it has to be tied to what it is that you're trying to win at. What is it that you're trying to do differently to what you've done before? What is it that you do really effectively today that you're trying to preserve? That I think is the question that answers your question, which is what's the KPI? Beyond NPS, I don't think that there are kind of standard ones that we see used consistently across our client base, and where they tend to be a little bit too broad to really understand what sits behind it.
I think our main focus is scalability, really. So we have a strong franchise, but as mentioned, the business model today is in the market space is not really driven to cater for a very large audience. So that's what we use digitalization for. And for that, we've actually developed a list of KPIs, and one of them is an engagement score. So basically, we track and see how many of the 250,000 business customers we are engaging with. Of course, from the point of view that we can only engage with them if we are 100% certain that it's relevant to the customer. And at the same time, so we have a score, physical touch points, meetings, digital meetings, emails, push notifications, and then of course the time that they spent reading our stuff, and the time they spent on our platforms as well. And that's something we have targets on. We have direct initiatives on how we're going to basically ensure that that score remains high. And for the ones where we don't have any specifically high score, we have certain activities in place for that.
Perhaps if I could ask you a question. So on that point, so you talk about the priority being scalability. What are the KPIs that you guys are using to measure that?
So if you look at, for instance, on the foreign exchange side, or let's stay in the wealth space. So that is really to see how many of customers, the number of customers that we actually have who are somehow engaged in a wealth management product. That's of course scale. And normally our wealth products were distributed by our wealth advisors. We have 1 million customers, 2 million customers in Denmark alone, right? And obviously our advisors are not able to cater for all of them. So clearly that's a score. Are we able to engage with a broad audience with relevant content, relevant products, and not even that, but can we also distribute it to them? Because one thing is being able to be relevant, but if not able to engage with it, and purchase it, then of course that's an issue, right? So KYC, the onboarding part of it, the suitability test and so on. Of course, the suitability of it is something that of course we also measure in that sense. So that's scale. So looking at the full value chain and the full funnel, and taking a funnel perspective, as you know from marketing, of course, is something that we are now approaching across business lines, and also from a transaction banking point of view and FX point of view, which was a fairly new concept to that side of the business.
So we have a couple more questions that have come in. Jacob, I'm going to ask you to answer this one very briefly. Key lessons from the first wave of digital robo-advisors and what can be improved in the second wave. And the reason that I'm asking you to answer it is I remember in our prep call, I think you said that profitability of robo-advisors is the elephant in the room or something to that extent. So I wanted to tee this up to you to answer quickly before we move on to our last one.
I think robo-advisor was sort of also the buzzword 5 years ago, right? When everybody was doing a robo-advisor, you had all the fintechs, and I was also sitting on stage talking about our robo-advisor, how fantastic it was and so on. But fact on that is it didn't make money, right? And very, very few robo-advisors do make money. It is, of course, a funnel game as well. You look at lifetime value, you look at the cost of acquisition. it makes sense from our point of view because we use it as an acquisition tool. So all the new customers we got in, obviously we had opportunity to cross-sell into new products and so on, and then increasing the lifetime value out of those customers. So I think robot advising has done a lot of good stuff, but I think anything that's not financially sustainable is not sustainable perfect. So I think the industry as such sort of also need to look inward to see how can they actually make this financially sustainable as well.
Especially in this environment, this funding
Especially
environment,
in this
economic environment. Yeah, exactly. All right, so we have 2 more questions. I don't think we're going to get to both of them. I think the one that I want to choose, although if there's a way to kind of condense them together, you let me know. We wanted to talk about who's doing it well. So best-in-class examples or case studies from your own experience. And the question that we're not really going to be able to do justice to is, with the marketing category changing so rapidly, how do you stay relevant to changing needs and demographics? So if there is an example of a best-in-class that is also set up to kind of handle all this change and stay relevant for new demographics and changes in the world, then amazing. But if not, I think the most important thing, or what I think would be the most important thing, is talking about specific examples of what good looks like for effectively attracting and retaining customers. Jacob?
Yeah, I have one. It's not in the wealth management space, those, but it can definitely is a source of inspiration. We are increasingly looking at transaction data, sort of sitting on 30% of the business in Denmark. The transaction data that we have is statistically prone to that you're able to conclude on what's actually happening in Denmark from a consumer perspective. And looking at how we can commercialize that and create good customer experiences, that is something that we're looking into right now. For inspiration, we looked across the world at people who's actually doing this. And 2 weeks ago, we had a call with CBA in Australia. And I have to say, Commonwealth Bank of Australia is the largest bank of Australia. What they're doing right there on data is truly amazing. So as a business customer, and you can use this in all parts of financial services, you're now able to sit and say you have a bakery. Within their system, you can now see in your area who's driving the consumer. Is it the elderly, is the young, how are bakers doing outside in other parts of Australia, and how are other retailers doing in retail that's similar to you and so on in real time. That's data, and it's when it's valuable and where you have a tremendously high level of relevance. It's truly impressive what those guys are doing, and they're packaging it in fantastic, easy to understand UX as well.
Tucker?
The clients that I work that I think are doing this well today, maybe if I think who are the ones that I think are going to win over the next 5 years, I don't think today are defined necessarily by the technology capabilities that they've got in place today. I think the ones, to my mind, that are going to win over the next 5 years are the ones that are crystal clear in terms of what is their value proposition, what is their target market, what are the needs of that target market, because those are the ones that are going to be able to be incredibly focused and efficient in terms of all the changes they do going forward. So whilst they might not necessarily be the leaders today, over the next 5 years, they're the ones, in my mind and in my experience, are the ones that have set themselves up to really outperform over the next 5 years or so. But in terms of what does that mean practically, what that means is partly being focused on those individuals, but also being really pragmatic about what are the constraints which we're operating in. So, which technologies do we have today that are flexible? Where do we have data that's high quality? Where do we have data that we can buy that's been pre-vetted by somebody else? It's the pragmatism of what can we do today combined with what is it that we want to be known for and where are we trying to get to. It's putting those two things together. That to me is what good looks like today, more so than any particular technology that anybody's implemented. All right, I am going to add a question, and I'm going to give you a second to think about it. Not that it's a hard one, but there is a question here from the audience that I will answer while you think. I want each of you to say the one most important thing that people should do differently after listening to this conversation around this topic. And the question that I'm going to answer, I'll give you a second. How do you create the most relevant content for clients? Any best practices?
So there's, of course, a lot of tactical best practices on different channels and length of copy and types of assets and things like that. The thing I will say that I'm probably most passionate about and hopefully can unlock a different perspective for some people is I think that you need to think more like a media company rather than a marketer or a product marketer. And why I think that is that my definition of marketing is how do you tell a story that changes perception and behavior in a way that drives growth of your business. And that's kind of what everybody talks about. What's the content that goes in there? What does the ad look like? What is the user experience? But actually, before you have a chance to tell somebody a story, you need their attention. And media companies, their entire business model is around attracting and retaining, and then of course monetizing attention. And so, you know, if you know 11FS, this was my whole philosophy there. If you think more about how do I create content that adds value to people, rather than how do I get somebody to do something that I want as a business, all marketing at the end of the day is about driving growth of the business, but it's not all about short-term growth. And the most successful content properties, the most successful brands are the ones that are thinking more like a media company than a marketer. So we have 20 seconds, so I need 10-second answers from each of you. What is the one thing that people should do differently after this conversation, Jacob?
I think it's super important that people understand that engagement is an iterative process. So test, A/B test. You will definitely not ace it to begin with. So it's about continuously improve.
I was actually going to say exactly the same thing. It's the feedback loop. So it doesn't require you to get it right first time, but if you've got the right feedback loop, it doesn't matter how wrong you are the first time, you will ultimately get it right.
Well, it's great that we're all on the same page. So I apologize that we didn't get to everybody's questions. We didn't even get to answer all of our own questions, but can't speak for you guys, but you know, I'm going to be around for a little bit if you have anything else, and I'm sure you can connect with all of us separately if you have anything else you want to talk about. Thank you so much for your time. See you later.